So what if the difference between an average story and a great story actually has nothing to do with your writing talent or even the story structure that you use, and everything to do with your self-awareness and the courage to face what the story is really about? Well, luckily for you, that's exactly what we're going to talk about in today's episode. Welcome to the Storytelling Lab, where filmmaking, brand, and business all collide. My name is Bennett, a filmmaker and an author, and for over 2 decades, I've studied how stories actually work on the screen, inside organizations, and most importantly, out in the real world. So each episode, I host one of the world's greatest storytellers to help break down the art and science of storytelling as a system, not just a skill. That means how stories create connection, how they move people emotionally, and ultimately, how they drive action. So if you want to learn to tell stories that do more than just sound good, but they actually achieve something, then this, dear storyteller, is the show for you. What's up, storytellers? Welcome back to the Storytelling Lab podcast. Today, my guest is Spade Robinson. Spade is a screenwriter and a story consultant, and someone who sits at a very interesting intersection between art and education. Spade has worked everywhere from the Sundance Institute to development at major networks and production companies, but now she works with writers to help them craft stronger stories, not just structurally though, emotionally. And that's exactly where we go in this conversation. We do talk about the importance of structure and actually how it creates freedom and why you should never start a story until you have the bones and the skeleton and the spine established. But we also get into why every story has a deeper human question that you can only answer here in your heart. And more often than not, the characters that tend to fall flat in your story tend to be related to something that's unresolved up here in your head. We also get into the future of storytelling, where it's all going, which is this part was super exciting to me, talking about why people should treat themselves as brands or treat themselves as media companies, as studios, and how we're moving to like verticals and short form storytelling and where AI falls into all of this. So if you are a screenwriter or a filmmaker or a brand storyteller, you are going to absolutely love this episode. It will help you understand and think about, where do I fit in to this future of storytelling? Where we're going? How do I tap in a way that I can separate myself from everyone else when we all start to have access to the same tools? So here's my conversation with Spade Robinson, and I hope that you love it. Spade, welcome to the Storytelling Lab.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. First of all, I love your name. This is the Cool Names Club, if you didn't notice.
Yes,
So
Rain.
you are already, top tier member. So welcome. Happy to have you. As I told you before we started recording, I had already seen your stuff before your team reached out to me in the Storytelling Lab and loved it and followed you and had you on my list to reach out to anyways. So I love when the world kind of
Okay.
connects people like that organically. So I knew it was a sign. Absolutely. I got very excited about that. So it's been a while since we connected that way, and I'm happy to have you on the show. The first thing I want to do is ask you, what do you love most about what you do?
Gosh, that's a hard question.
Isn't it?
So most of my work is sort of split down the middle.
Right.
On one hand, I am a storyteller, I'm a screenwriter and filmmaker, and that's sort of half of my work, and then the other half is working with screenwriters and
So
uh,
let me, pardon me, but I'll jump right in. And I know that. And that's why I'm even more interested, because my career is similar, right? half of mine is spent storytelling my own stories out to the world and helping others as well. So I'm really interested to see. And there doesn't have to be one answer.
okay, so I'll give you one for each side.
There you go.
I probably spend most of my time on the consulting end, and even that is sort of divided into 2 parts. So on one sort of large chunk of it, I'm working one-on-one with writers in the same way I'm sort of talking to you. And then on the other hand, I'm working with production company studios, or nonprofit organizations that support artists to help them choose their cohort that they're going to support or fund or give a grant to or whatever. And what that does is it helps me to inform writers what these fellowships contests are looking for, studios, networks, whoever. And then on the other hand, it helps me to understand what's happening in the field so that when I'm working with a network, I can tell them, this is what's trending. This is what's happening with writers. These are the themes that are emerging right now that you're going to probably see on television 2 years down the line, because that's usually how it works. Um, My favorite part on the consulting side is definitely working one-on-one with screenwriters. It's not that I don't enjoy working with networks and studios and production companies, but it's a lot less intimate of a relationship.
Totally. Yeah.
And when I sit down to work with a writer, there is no version of it that does not become therapy. It always becomes therapy because everyone's stories come from them. And there's no way we can talk about making it better unless we talk about your unforgiveness problem, because that's, that's what it usually boils down to. I cannot tell you how often that's what it boils down to. Um, and I get to know people in this really intense, intimate way, that I just wouldn't otherwise unless we're talking about something that came from your brain and your heart, you know? Um, on the storytelling side, I have to say that my favorite thing is creating family around a project. Whenever there's a new project and you bring a producer and you have a lawyer and you have a DP that you're working with, and you create this little mini family. You kind of go through a war together. Um,
Hmm.
and these are relationships in which I see parts of you that maybe your partner doesn't even see, or I can recognize a talent in you that whoever hired you before and didn't give you enough voice didn't see. And so, um, I get to be a part of myself that I'm not able to be
Yeah.
in other roles in my life. So I love creating relationships. I love creating family, and
Hmm.
being a filmmaker allows me to do that.
That was a beautiful answer. It's so true. I always, when I was younger, I worked in the restaurant industry, and I always liken a film set to that space, like high, intensity, very collaborative. Like every person on the line matters, from the owner to the dishwasher, and has to rely on one another to execute that dish in a timely and tasteful manner. Same thing with storytelling, with filmmaking. That's a really wholesome way to approach it. And man, the community, because of that, you're so tight. Like, I mean, we're all pulling together to support a common dream or goal and help tell a story that we believe in, hopefully. And yeah, it's like, even if that journey doesn't end with the success metric that we hoped for or whatever, it's always a win. It's always a success. Just being able to take it. What I often say is, like, taking something that only exists here in your head or here in your heart and making it a thing that exists is like the hardest thing to do. And
It's like a
so
miracle every single time.
every time, so you are like you're like war buddies afterwards.
And I compare it to, and this is so much, well, I'm not gonna say which one is harder, but I compare it to making a touchdown. And the reason why is
Mm,
because when people compare basketball to football, basketball is such a high scoring game, right?
yes.
And football is usually much lower scoring. And it's because making a touchdown is so hard. Like,
Yes.
the opposition against you is so intense and so purposeful of pushing you back toward, the other end zone, that the fact that you made it all the way to the opposite end zone is a miracle every single time. And that's how I feel about making a film. There is so much against you. And I don't even care if it's a bad film. The fact that you made it to the finish line, it's a miracle every single time.
Absolutely. This is gonna be good. I'm excited. That's a great comparison. Because, and this is not to downplay basketball. It is simply, like you said, it's just a high scoring game. And I think there are instances in football where maybe, someone gets lucky, but by far the mass majority of plays are scoring plays. So much else is going on for that to happen. In basketball, you can have a takeaway, literally pick their pocket, go the full court, lay it up, boom. And that was almost all you, right? Your defense helped, cover the other players or whatever. But with football, like, the blocking has to be there, the strategy, the space, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm gonna marinate on that a little bit more. I really like that analogy. But it is absolutely a battle. It's absolutely collaborative, and that's the beautiful part about it, because it's not easy. It's not easy to score a touchdown. It's not easy to complete any kind of project. And I have to agree with that. Being a writer as well and doing a lot of writer here in this seat solo in the lab is like, it's a struggle. So being on set and being able to see that story come to life is where I get my energy, because it can suck it out of you sitting here day after day.
Yeah.
What did you mentioned this part about, I forget the word that you used, but people's own intimate, emotional, personal journeys and how it impacts their ability to tell stories or to write screenplays. I forget what you said. You had this great term, and then I got sidetracked mentally about the touchdown. Their unforgiveness. Is that what you said?
Yes. Okay. So there's all kinds of personal things that come up when I'm working with a writer. Unforgiveness is probably the most common, um, because I'm not approaching it trying to get in your business. I promise. I promise I'm not trying to get in your business. I'm only concerned about the story. But when there are characters that have no dimension, right? They're
Mm,
horrible people. Um, then we have to make that better. And and usually when a writer is writing a character with one dimension, it's just someone they don't understand. And usually people we don't understand are people who we feel put on by. And you refuse to understand that person because you have this righteous indignation against whatever was done to you.
mm,
So we need to address that first so that you can see humanity in whoever has wronged you, so that we can give their character some dimension. That's the thing I really care about, but we can't get there without going through that sort of emotional psychological journey. It has to end up on the page for it to end up on the screen. And then it has to happen inside of you in order for it to end up on the page. And that's usually where I meet writers where they are.
I think it would be a fair assumption. It is an assumption that most writers leave a piece of themselves in their stories somewhere, even if it's small. But do you find that newer writers tend to rely a lot on what has happened to them or people that they know or personal aspects of their story that they try to now I'm definitely putting words of my own or wedging them in there, but try to wedge their personal stories onto the page, and then therefore it leaves them in a predicament like this where it's like that character's not really fleshed out because you just based it off of someone else. Does that make sense?
Yes. I think newer writers rely on plot that they know
Mm.
more intimately. Like newer writers will have more situations that remind them of something that they know about. I find that more veteran writers rely on thematic or like human truths that are still personal to them, but it may exist in a plot that's otherworldly or completely different. I find that as writers mature, they start to become more brave emotionally, and you have to do less work to pull out of them what the human truth is of their story. Whereas younger writers may spend time talking about, oh, this young 20 something moves to New York and doesn't know what to do or whatever. But I have to do so much clawing to get at what this is really about in order for it to exist sort of on that same plane.
I think I understand what you mean by this term, but can you elaborate on what human truth is or means?
Yes. So I have this theory, and again, this is a theory. My theory is that every script ever is written because the writer, unless they were commissioned to write it, and even then, sometimes it's in there. Um, Human beings are trying to figure out the human experience. And so most scripts are usually about thematically something that they don't understand, something they have questions about when it comes to being alive, right? When you experience grief, it is this enormously difficult thing that we are underprepared for, but everybody experiences it. And so once we get there, we're trying to make sense of like, what do you mean this is permanent? I don't, what do you mean? I don't understand. And so we start to write about these larger questions we have about what it feels like to be alive. Um, and so I think after we practiced being vulnerable over and over and over again, we sort of built up that muscle where we have easier access to those feelings without feeling like it's going to kill us later, sort of in a more experienced writers. And then I think as we're younger and we have not had to confront um those experiences um in a way where everybody can see it yet,
Mhm, mhm.
then it takes some time to build that muscle.
That makes sense. I appreciate that. What do you think it was in your life or your lived experiences that led you to this career path? Can you put your finger on it, on a time where you're like, "Oh,
So we're being real, right?
yes, we are."
Um
As real as you want to be.
what led me to consulting? I was working at Sundance and I wanted to leave my job and be a full-time filmmaker. And I thought that I had just started because I had been in development at different stages, like at a production company and a network, um, and then as a funder at Sundance, particularly in the doc world, where I was developing stories from like no footage at all the way to like a full fine cut, right? And that really built my understanding of narrative. Because if you can handle doc, you can handle anything. So I started to get, friends were sending me scripts and I started to realize I had a knack for not just like what the script needed, but helping get a writer there, which are two very different things. And so I thought that that was going to be the way I was going to be sustainable without like a traditional job job. So on paper, that's sort of what brought me here. Internally, what made me the kind of consultant I am, it stems from so much bitterness that my career did not go the way that I anticipated,
Hmm.
and passion for transparency. Took so many steps that you're quote unquote supposed to take.
Mhm.
And when I got to those places, the promise really was not there. And I became um I wasn't aware of how entitled I was, you know. I assumed that things would just work out because I did all the things. Um and I realized that I didn't understand the business of filmmaking, and that was a huge deficit to my trajectory. And so now I only want to talk about the combination of art and commerce together.
Yes.
Without that, for me, it's a non-conversation because of, you know, um, what I experience and me being disgruntled about not being exposed to what really matters in terms of getting something done and made. And just my own wrestling with what my life and career became. And I really did have to wrestle with
Mhm.
that.
And if we back up a step or a season or two, before that, what led you to the job at Sundance? When did you know you wanted to be a storyteller and really like approach that as a life?
Well, I started out as an actor. So I like in high school and all of that, I
Mhm.
was doing plays and I was begging to audition for this and begging to audition for that. And I was a theater major, and once I graduated, I was like, oh, like there's no like path, there's no like okay. So I was like, well, I'm gonna move to LA and start auditioning. And my mother was like, well, why don't you go back to school so you can pay for it? So that is when I applied to USC. Um, and one of my colleagues, another student in my cohort from USC, was doing an internship at Sundance. And when his internship was over, he told someone there, like, you should hire my friend. She's the female version of me. She's a straight female version of me. And that's how I got an interview. And then I just hunted them down. Like, I sent a thank you email. Then I sent like a physical card in the mail. Then I don't know if I sent like candy or something. I like did whatever. I was so broke and hungry at the time. Um, the person who became my boss eventually ended up emailing me. She was like, "We got it. We see you. We know you exist. You're good. You're
Please
good."
stop mailing us.
Right. So that's how I got that role. And it changed my life.
Bet. That's a great gig to have. Let's get into to writing specifically a little bit. And you've touched on some things that will come back up. But we've already talked a lot about kind of newer or quote unquote beginner writers. Maybe something that we all face, no matter what level we're at, is the blank page, right? How do you approach that? How do you advise people approach that in terms of starting a story? A lot of people, if they haven't created the habit and they've got one story they're dying to tell, they don't know where to begin. But you may be able to apply this to the next screenplay as well. Perhaps. I don't want to answer for you. But what advice do you have about someone sitting down like, damn, I've been wanting to do this forever. It's time. I'm ready to start. Now what?
Never advise anybody to start writing a script in the script. My advice is always to start with an outline. And I know it is not the most fun, sexiest part of the process. I call it the vegetables of screenwriting because you need it, but people don't really enjoy it. But I advise that because it eliminates writer's block. If you think that it's difficult to sit in front of a blank page and the anxiety that is there, and every idea you have sounds dumb, and you're like, oh, well, that's a good one, but it has to happen later. So then what do I do next? Like, if you want to get rid of all of that, then you make those difficult decisions in a vacuum, which is an outline. So this is going to be kind of graphic, but I definitely think of a screenplay like a body, right? And your outline is the skeleton, and then you blossom that outline, right? So you add more and more flesh to it until it becomes a script. If you write the script first, when it comes to rewriting, you have to go in and make so many changes, and it's such a bloody process of surgery to make a script turn out great, when from the beginning, structurally, you could have given it strong enough bones to where you don't have sort of like that gory thing of rewriting a script 20 times. You start with really, really strong character arc even before you start the outline. I have my clients do like a story statement, and that gives you a compelling arc for your character. And then I take that and build a clear beginning, middle, and end. And then I blossom that into what's the first act, second act, and third act. And then I blossom those into scenes, and those scenes into beats, and those beats into a script. And then you're done with your first draft without having to go through the emotional upheaval of, I don't know what happens next. Because when you sort of stretch the story from those smaller pieces, the emotional logic of what has to happen next because of who you built this character to be and the journey you have them on is so automatic that it answers these questions for you without you, and it does so authentically because it's rooted in who you made these people.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to go back and get notes like, oh, I don't understand why this character made that decision, or I don't buy this relationship, or this dialogue doesn't make sense, because you've done so much of that sort of development work ahead of time.
What is a story statement? How would you define that, and how do you craft one?
A story statement is this very like discriminatory question that every script asks. So the sentence is, this is a story of blank. You put your main character's name in there, or another character. This is a story of blank who wants blank. You fill in their tangible want. Will they be successful, or will their internal obstacle prove too difficult? So there's a blank and then you put in their internal obstacle. So you usually know the character's name, Billy, Bob, whoever. And then what you wrestle with even before you get to the page is, what does this person want that's tangible that I can see on screen, that's not internal, because otherwise it would be a song and not a movie. And then what are they up against that is internal, not external? So a lot of times when we have a character who is up against something, it is something that's out there in the world. Like there's a comet coming to Earth and is going to kill everybody, or there's an alcoholic grandmother, or there's an abusive father, or whatever. And we think that that's what your character is up against. But just like in real life, it's not. Your character is up against whatever is holding them back inside. And the plot, the comment, the grandmother, the teacher who is inappropriate, all of that just complicates the journey you're already on as a person.
Mm.
And so in order for you to get the thing that you are after, you have to undergo some kind of internal change. And that usually becomes what the character needs as opposed to what the character wants. And your story statement sort of helps you understand what goes in the story and what doesn't. So once you are done with your story statement, and you don't just do it one time, right? You do it like a dozen times until you get to a cocktail of wants and needs that are so true about your character, and usually true about the writer. Um that whenever you have an idea or somebody pitches you something, you can look at it and say, is this what my story's about?
Right.
No, because this is what my story's about right here. So that doesn't fit. This fits, that fits. And that discrimination is what helps you make your creative decisions.
You know, I mentioned to you before we started recording that a lot of my audiences are brand storytellers, not all of them, many of them. And this is so useful for that world, for the business world too. You talk about the intersection of art and commerce. It's your brand narrative, like tying back to like, well, why does your product or service exist in the world? Like this is our true north, our guiding principles, guiding light, whatever you want to call it. And I just love the way that you phrase that, of just like, if you can't look back and see like where it fits into that thing that you consciously wrote and declared, then there's a misalignment. And I think that's so easy to avoid that task, and therefore you're kind of throwing things out there and you hope they stick, but it's not like, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be that hard.
Right. I think that there's this misconception that, well, I'll say it this way. It is emotionally easier to jump into like the ice cream and cake of being creative. If you're starting a company, it's so much more fun to focus on the colors and the brand and the logo and like, what's going to be forward facing. Then things like, what are this company's values? What is our processes? What are the types of relationships that we need to have? What is the back end financially? What are all of our streams of income? All of that like boring stuff that's related to having a business. But that's the stuff that holds your business up, right? So if you do that first, you can sort of swim around in all of your creative decisions and have the time of your life because you're not stopped by the fact that you didn't pay your taxes, right? Well, it's it's the same thing with, storytelling. If you handle your foundation now, when you get to the point where you're like, okay, my script happens on Jupiter and do these aliens have noses or not? You can have the time
Yeah.
of your life, because I know that there's a basic human narrative happening that's going to be compelling no matter what I decide these monsters look like. Um, and it gives you freedom, I think. That structure gives you freedom. And I think it's the same thing with the brand.
This is, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's definitely a life lesson. There's a Navy SEAL, Jocko Willink. I always have trouble pronouncing his last name, but he does a lot of personal development stuff. But he's got I think he wrote a book with this tagline, but he had a tagline that was like discipline equals freedom. It's exactly what you're talking about. Like giving yourself these constraints actually allows you to be freer or more creative later down the road. And what his, approach was like, it was more about like your daily habits and practices and rituals and your regimen or whatever. It's like, no, if I'm disciplined and I make sure I get up at this time and do my chores or whatever, handle my business, it actually allows me space to do the things like hang out with my kids or whatever later on, because of that. So I just saw some overlap there, which, I mean, it's no secret that a lot of these lessons are life lessons, but it's so true. And it's so like, a lot of people miss that in the beginning. What'd you say? The ice cream and cake? That's so good. I mean, that's so good. We want to go to the fun stuff that we think make up the brand, where it's not. It's the values and what do you stand for and what are you going to stand on business about no matter what hits the fan, no matter what obstacles, you encounter, what are you always going to come back to? And that's hard. That's tough work. And
It
doing this
is.
part of the storytelling is tough work as well.
It is. It is. It's a bigger lift up front.
Yeah.
But so you know the phrase "all money isn't good money." Well,
Yes. Yeah.
filmmakers deal with that a lot, right? Like
Yeah.
you're talking to a producer and they're willing to fund your film, and you've been trying to get your film funded for 6
Oh my
years.
goodness.
Okay,
Right.
finally, but you know in the back of your mind that person will not make a good partner, but they're bringing the money, And so the thing is that when you decide ahead of time what your story is really about, and someone is saying, "I wanna change these things," you're like, "That's there are things I can compromise on.
Yes.
There are things that I cannot, because that's not what the story is about." You have so much more confidence going into those meetings and relationships and everything else when you have a sense of what the thing is. And it's the same thing with business, right? If you are a brand and there's a very specific thing you do, and there's a specific way you do it, and there's a value system that you operate in, right? Then there can be a lot of opportunities coming your way. But you know how to exercise discernment a lot better when
Hmm.
you do that sort of foundational work ahead of time, and you communicate effectively. And that's the other part that I talk about a lot with clients who are moving from the storytelling phase to the production phase. When you start bringing on partners and producers and your DP and your wardrobe person, whoever, you have to be able to articulate what the priorities are for this project. Otherwise, you're making 4 different films. So if I say that I have 3 main priorities for this project, one is commerce, like I need it to be commercially viable. Under that, I want critical acclaim, and under that, I want to like create some kind of social change. And in that order, which I'm agnostic about the order. I don't
Sure,
care
sure.
if your top priority is like I want to be famous. Fine. We can do that. But if you don't communicate that to the main team, then you're going to have a lot of friction down the line, because your producer is trying to figure out how to get more critical acclaim, and your DP is trying to make an artful film as the most important thing and going over budget. And you just are trying to figure out how to make it commercially successful. So you want the budget to be. So you have to be on the same page about that and vulnerable enough to express what these priorities really are, so that you attract not just people, but the people that are going to take the project where you want it to go.
What is it that blocks most people? And we talked about the blank page. We talked about the issue of forgiveness internally. What are other blockers that you see in your workshops like frequently?
The top one is like lack of self-awareness.
You say more?
So, um there have been many times where a writer will get frustrated with me because what I am digging at is something that they do not want to talk about. I didn't bring it up, you wrote about it, right? You brought it up first, but because there is a wall there and there isn't enough self-awareness to realize this is what I'm really talking about, even though technically you grew up in New York City and this happened in Montana and you tried to divorce it from yourself so much, it is still very much about that thing that you are unwilling to talk about. So you wrote about it and now the script is mediocre and now we have to talk about it. So it gets better. And so I think when you're more self-aware about what's actually on the page, then we can go right to it. I would say the next thing has to do with structure. I'm not someone who thinks that everyone should be beholden to the classical three-act structure, but it does exist for a reason. And so when you decide to go outside of it, then you want to make up for that by understanding why it exists. So, for example, if you say, I don't believe in the three-act structure, I'm an artist, I'm a genius, I don't need it. Fine. But you still need to have things like momentum and you still need to create suspense and you still need the scenes still need to speak to each other, right? So if you leave structure behind, then you still artistically, creatively have to infuse the script with storytelling things that human beings can absorb as narrative.
Yeah.
And I think deciding not to have any structure at all, just starting with vibes, um, is I think what makes scripts underprepared for whatever opportunity writers are looking for. And I would have to say the third thing has to do with just a lack of nuance. You can have something that is structurally perfect, formatted, beautiful. The story is actually kind of compelling, but there's no subtext in the dialogue. There's not a lot of nuance in the relationships. Um, there's not a lot of dimension or complexity to the characters. And that sort of additional work is what will elevate your script.
Absolutely. I had a cinematographer on recently that said everything is subtext. I mean, the shots that you choose, the words that you use, et cetera, or it should be if you're doing it effectively. I'll send you that episode. I think that you would dig that one. How do you approach structure? Do you have a certain structure that you adhere to? Do you think it's per project? I totally agree that, like, with the skeleton, as you say, like, or you know what it makes me think of what you just said was like, when I've got a picture of Kobe Bryant on my wall with his daughter, and when people are masters at their craft, they always go back to the basics. They never stop practicing the basics, right? Kobe being one of them that would shoot free throws all day long, layups all day long. And you can apply this to any discipline. Once you master it, you can become really creative and express yourself and be a different style of writer or style of player, whatever. But the best of the best never stop practicing the basics. So when I think of structure, I'm like, yes, that's the basic, fundamental foundation, right? And what you were saying, I totally agree with, is like, you can change those, but there's nothing saying you have to stick to that, but you have to know why you're breaking it, and you should at least know why they exist, like you said, first, and how to play that way, because you can be top of the tops, filmmakers, and just have a very basic structure that you follow, and you make a beautiful, poignant film that people love and show up, pay money to watch. or you can go outside the box, but it's a lot harder that way. But those, I would absolutely argue that those people, those storytellers, writers, and filmmakers know the fundamentals first, and then look at ways that they can maybe manipulate that while still including momentum, suspense, or spiking people's dopamine, tension, whatever you want to call it. And what would you say? All the scenes are like connected. I don't think that was the word you used. But sorry, I went on a tangent there. But how do you approach structure?
I I always start with the traditional 3 act structure. Um I think each act has a job, and then each scene in each act has a job. And if I do wanna sort of move outside of that, right, like, I want the climax to be a few scenes lower than where I usually put it, or I really want, like, a long sequence that I want people to, like, feel like they're holding their breath, so I do something I wouldn't traditionally do. I usually break those rules so far down the process because I wanna make sure that there's a clear story being told, and the container of a 3 act structure helps me to make sure that, um, at the core of it, there is a beginning, middle, shift, and end, right? Most stories have that. And then I'm a few drafts in, or I'm deep, deep, deep in my outline, then I can decide, okay, I'm gonna forego what usually is lasting change, sort of at the top of the 3rd act, and I'm gonna have this character double down on not changing. Because like when it comes to the story statement, right? I said there's a question that every story asks. Well, there's no rule that the answer to that question has to be yes. Will this character be successful? Most stories are yes, the character kind of gets what they want, but not every time. And sometimes characters don't change. And what that does for the audience is it changes us, right? So when the bad guy wins, the audience is changed, not the main character. There has to be some change happening, usually on the inside of the person you wrote, or on the inside of me who's watching it. Because it's an exchange that I'm having with you. You deliver on a promise of entertaining me and compelling me and reflecting life back to me. And I give my time and suspend my disbelief for this experience. It's a relationship. And
100%.
the concept of I'm an artist and I'm making a thing for art's sake, and I am not at all interested in the promise that I'm delivering to someone doesn't feel like the art form that I'm involved in. It feels like maybe something different.
I think it's a flawed belief anyway. Art has always been tied to commerce, as far as I see it. It's always been for people, for a reason, for a message, something you're trying to convey, or an experience, or a feeling you're trying to conjure up. And there have been people that have paid for it, right?
Right.
I probably did that for a long time. Tried to keep those worlds separate, but no. And I think that's a lot of what we talk about on the show, is that exact intersection. So I'm glad that you land there as well. We haven't talked much about documentary, which I know is a big part of your background too, as is mine. And we could probably do a whole show just on that, but I wonder, with all the talk that we're doing about structure and approaching the story from the beginning, from the blank page, so to speak, what are the biggest differences and similarities, if you'd like, in nonfiction and fictional storytelling, in terms of the approach of like crafting the story?
I think the biggest difference with specifically just crafting, on the crafting side, between fiction and nonfiction has to do with how much control um, the filmmaker or writer has. With documentary, you are given a set of things that are happening. And you have to take real life and wrestle it to the ground to make it something that's compelling. Life is happening on a continuum of a timeline where it's in control and you're not. So if you miss it, you've missed it. It's not happening again. You missed it, right? There are reconstructions and all that kind of stuff. But like if you're following a family going across America and they have this experience in a restaurant that is so whatever and you weren't there, that's gone. That was gonna be the climax of your movie, but whatever, you got sick that day. Um with fiction film, you have control over all the elements. And the only thing you're really up against is budget. Um, and it gives you so much freedom. Um, there's no, this is gonna sound nuts, but because you have all the freedom in the world, there really shouldn't be bad fiction films, right? Because you, it could have been anything, and it always could have been great. With documentary, you are under the sort of gun, if you will, of real life and timelines. Here's what makes it super special though. Also on the craft side, the relationship that you build with the people on the other side of the camera
Yeah.
is unlike any other experience. Um,
Mm-hmm.
because you're navigating what intimacy really is and how cameras change that and where trust can happen. You want something, the filmmaker wants something. You want real life to play out in front of you in a way that is authentic. And the people on the other side want something. Um, and you owe so much respect to people lending you your lives that it's vulnerable for the both of you,
Totally.
right?
Yes.
Because you could put yourself in a position where literally you are filming and nothing happens, and you're filming for 2 years and nothing has happened, right? And that puts you in a vulnerable position financially, emotionally, all this other stuff, intellectually. If you're borrowing favors or crew or whatever, your social capital is involved. And so this exchange, it's beautiful and it's complicated. And I think with fiction, it's different because it's trust, creative trust, but in a very different way where you're sort of making a baby together, but you're all coming from it from the perspective like of being a parent rather than like the other way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Last question, and it's a doozy. Um, what what are your thoughts on the way the industry is changing now, from the perspective of someone who is trying to craft and create their own films to be made, writing, screenwriters specifically. Things have changed quite a bit. Some things are the same, but the industry feels like a big question mark right now. In some ways, I'm very excited because I feel like there's this swing back to indie film and people kind of taking more control of their artistic destiny, if you will. That's also scary for some people, I'm sure, who just wanted somebody to just pay them and take their thing, But how has it changed, or is it changing, in your mind, for folks that are trying to get their stories on the screen?
It has changed a lot in a very short period of time. I graduated from film school in the middle of a writer's strike, and it didn't mean very much to me back then. And experiencing the writer's strike that we just experienced, whoa, because I was so much more aware of what the demands were and um coming out of a writer's room. That's a little bit different because we're talking about
Mm-hmm.
TV, but just watching the culture of, mini rooms and the number of writers shrinking and the number of writers that are sitting to set shrinking and like, um, so I'll start from the top. Um, the people who are paying for movies are different, and that changes literally because the what they're making is different. So
Mm-hmm.
even though we've demonized studios for years and years and years, studio heads, blah, 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 blah. They don't know what they're doing. They're not creative. I used to live with a studio executive, and there are so many studio executives who care very much about movies, who give notes and try and develop them to make a great thing, to make a profitable thing, and also to make a great thing. When you remove that class of people and the creative decision making is in terms of funding is mostly coming from people who are looking at purely the metrics and the data, um the incentive for why to make a thing has shifted. Okay, so here's how it lands with those of us who are writers. um there's a way to take advantage of that. And the way to take advantage of that does have to do with first mentally, grieving the traditional route that you thought you were going to go. Th- That has to go first before the creative part because you will end up stuck and disgruntled
Mm.
at some point that you say, well, I played the game and I'm still not getting the glory that I thought was going to come along with my career. Um, so I think that's first because there's a lot of labor that you can resent if you don't get to the place where you are okay with what this new role could be. And that is making things yourself. So on my TikTok, I talk a lot about writers thinking of themselves as studios, and I do think that they should. I think every writer should think of themselves as a studio with a slate of projects that reflect their sensibility and be approaching their meetings and opportunities that way. With that being said, I think that's the future of how writers are going to have autonomy over their careers and what they make and the kind of capital they have access to. And I do think that that is a path to a more traditional route because once the money or views, eyeballs, I mean, we're in an attention economy right now, right? So it may not be I was able to make independent film and it made $2 million even though I like marketed myself and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
We're talking about I was able to garner the affection and attention of these huge number of people, and therefore I can do that at a larger scale. Um, so I think there's a great opportunity in that if you're going about it that way. I would say if you are going about it that way, you still you can't skip over the business part the way that you would if you would have gone a more traditional route. You do have to understand things like how the market works. You do have to understand who's buying and who's selling and how to attach talent and all of that kind of stuff, like how to package something. Um, with that said, I think the new wave that we're going to experience is going to be in short form content.
Mm.
I know people hate the word content. And I know short form isn't where everyone wanted to end up, but I do think it's where people are going to get a lot of power. Um, and inside of short form content is going to be working with brands in a very savvy way. So when I was still in film school, different companies would come to us and say, we want you guys to pitch us an idea of a story and have our brand somehow in it, but not like in the forefront.
Yes.
So we did one for Subway, and it was just like telling a story, and there would just be a sandwich on the table.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of integrated marketing is what brands are going to be looking for, and storytellers who are very savvy with things like narrative and character development and high production value on a small budget are going to be able to take advantage of those opportunities and hopefully use that capital to fund whatever they want. So that's where the freedoms are. I think what we're going to end up coming up against is going to be the clash between asking ourselves what's authentic and what's not.
Mm-hmm.
Stories that people wrote versus stories that were not written by humans is going to be, I think, the threshold of how people are going to try and figure out how to navigate that and remain valuable in terms of voice and talent.
And I think that makes, the things that we talked about in the beginning of the conversation, your issues that show up on the page, not issues sounds negative, not only negative, your experiences show up on page. I think it's going to be more and more important to have that dialed in as we move to this age of AI, being able to generate content as well. Because not only does no other person in the world have my unique lived experiences, but certainly, artificial intelligence doesn't. They're just picking from somewhere else. So I think it becomes more important for us to be dialed into is like, what kind of stories do I want to tell the world and why versus others. But we will see.
I agree. I mean, I think, do you remember, I remember exactly where I was when this happened, but it was years and years and years ago, when there was a Twitter thread of this story, of these two strippers who became friends and went on a trip together to make some money. And then I remember because everybody on Twitter was talking about it, and it was the way that the tweets went, it was just like back to back to back, telling what happened next, telling what happened next, telling what happened. I think maybe it came out that this wasn't even a true story. I don't know the full details, but it did become a movie called Zola that was made. And I remember after the thread came and people were just like so addicted to it. And people were like, this has to be a movie. Ava DuVernay should direct it. This person should play this person, and it did end up becoming a movie. And the director is a director I'm a big fan of. I think that filmmakers should really pay attention to that. And endearing audiences that you personally have access to the stories that you want to tell.
Yes.
And getting excitement around that, because that's not the first time it's happened. It's not the last time it's happened. It's the one that I remember the most and the one I can like really track in my lifetime, like the trajectory of it. But I've seen so much conversation online and about, there's so much discourse about the movies and shows that are out there. And we're living at a time where when I first graduated from film school, there wasn't like TikTok. There wasn't like, you can make a film and there's a review and maybe people have comments online, but the conversations weren't as contagious and went like wildfire the way that they can now.
Absolutely.
And that can work very well for you or against you, but it's something that I think more storytellers should take advantage of.
100% agree. Well, I think that's a good place to stop for today, but I really feel like we could, any of these like subtopics, I feel like we could have veered off and talked for an hour about, to be quite honest. Spade, thank you so much for being here. This has been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to seeing more of your content.
Yay, thank you for having me. It's just so fun.
Absolutely. See you soon. My name is Rain Bennett. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed that episode, do us a favor and subscribe to the podcast. If you're already a subscriber and you're enjoying the show, give us a review and let us know the value that you've gotten from it. We love to hear from our listeners and learn about the benefits that they're getting from the show. That's what fuels us, and that's what fuels the show. And if you've already subscribed and you've already reviewed it and you think there's someone else that would benefit from listening to this show, please share it with them. The more we grow, the more we can help you grow, and that's what we're here to do. Join us next time on the Storytelling Lab.